Good afternoon, good morning if you're in the UK. My name is Donald Hyslop, and I'm really pleased to be moderating this panel on food waste at IF2020. This is one of the largest virtual policy festivals organised by OPP, themselves a policy information startup who created the Ideas Festival. And the festival's bringing together policymakers and innovative organisations who are already providing solutions to some of the major societal issues. And of course, food waste and tackling the crisis it creates has become one of those major issues we're facing. On the panel today, I'm delighted to have with me Aoife Allen, who's the head of food at Hubbub UK, an environmental charity where she runs a series of practical campaigns, and Christophe Diercxsens, Global Public Affairs Manager at Too Good To Go, who aim to increase awareness and policy focus on the environmental, economic and social consequences of food waste. And I'll ask them to open with introductions in a moment, but firstly just to set a little bit of a context. And from my perspective, I've been involved with food markets, business improvement districts, in the UK and internationally for many years. And I just want to try and paint a scale of the issues that we're facing. 1/3 of food produced in the world for human consumption in the region of 1.3 billion tonnes is currently lost or wasted. 2/3 in the industrialized world and 1/3 in the developing world. And food production are the biggest employers in the world, but they're also the biggest cause of environmental damage. Greenhouse gases, landfill, methane, to mention a few. And in the EU itself, 88 million tonnes of food waste is generated at a cost of 143 billion euros, while at the same time, every second day, some 36 million people cannot afford a quality meal. And in recent years, I think this issue has come to the forefront in the EU, for example, in the circular economy package and the revised EU waste legislation. And with the new farm to fork strategy as part of the European Green Deal, we're seeing major moves in the right direction. But of course, we still face huge challenges. Challenges both in the contradictions of policy, for example, with the rules on best before and end use dates, and the huge amount of packaging that we use, and in societal terms, with COVID, of course, dominating all our lives at the moment, and with an impending global recession. So let's explore some of these challenges and opportunities of policy and practice with the panel today. And I would just before we start, just to say also, we will have a discussion, then we'll have the chance for some questions at the end, and there is a chat function under session for those of you logged in on the box. If you want to make a comment or towards the end, ask a question and we'll see if we can deal with it. But let's kick off with Aoife. Welcome, Aoife.
Thanks, Donald. Thanks for that really comprehensive and nice introduction. So yeah, just to introduce myself a little more, I'm Aoife Allen. I'm the head of food at Hubbub. We're an environmental charity based in the UK. We work with the broadest possible cross-section of society, of the public, to make changes that are greener in their daily lives. So we aim to meet people where they're at as such. So we speak to people with campaigns about food, about the clothing that they wear, the homes that they live in, and their neighbourhoods too. And within my role, looking at food, it kind of splits into two core pieces: supporting people to reduce food waste, and also supporting people to eat more sustainable diets in the round. So I suppose there's a bit of a question around what's a practical campaign on food waste. So I'll just give you a super quick overview of some of the campaigns we're working on at the moment. We work at the corporate or the retail level. So we've recently just rounded off a short and very intensive campaign with Tesco to support people to reduce their food waste at home. Been working with 55 households across the UK with lots of practical information, tips and fun challenges to help them tackle their waste. We have an information campaign with Norfolk and Suffolk councils in the UK to support local residents to understand food waste better and save some money by reducing their waste. And we also run a network of 100 community fridges across the UK, where any person can come and bring food once it's unopened and within date that they don't need at home. Retailers can donate, and anyone can come and take some fresh, free surplus food away. So that's a bit of a quick overview of what Hubbub does in that space.
Great. And we'll come back to that, particularly the business stuff that you just made. Thanks, Christophe.
Yes, thanks, Donald. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Ideas Festival session on food waste. As Donald rightly mentioned, the food waste problematic is enormous. A third of all food produced ends up wasted or not being consumed. The good news is that tackling food waste and reducing food waste is also the number one most impactful solution to reduce greenhouse gases and to tackle climate change more broadly. So at Too Good To Go, what do we do? Too Good To Go is a social impact company that aims to empower and inspire everybody to fight food waste together. When I say empower and inspire, what does that mean? On the one hand, we empower people through an app that we've developed. The app is available for free to download on your smartphones, and it connects you to surplus food from stores in the neighborhood for you to reserve and pick up at your place and time of convenience. So that way, you allow the store to reduce its levels of surplus food and therefore its waste, and you have a direct impact on the reducing food waste levels in your neighborhood, in your country. As I said, the app is available to download for free. You choose your magic bag of surplus food to save in function of several factors, such as proximity, such as type of food you would like to save, such as pickup time for your magic bag, and that way contributes positively to food waste reduction. Proud to say that after 4 years, we've now saved 45 million magic bags of surplus food, and we're working with around 50,000 food stores across Europe. So this is the way that we try to empower everybody to do their bit in the fight against food waste. Too Good To Go also aims to inspire people to reduce food waste. When I say inspire, I mean we've developed a movement against food waste, where we work with households, with businesses, with policymakers, and with schools to achieve a newfound respect for food. And thereby really, look for a paradigm shift in the way we buy, in the way we consume, and in the way we reduce our food waste. Give you a practical example of that. Don briefly mentioned the misunderstanding linked to products' expiration dates. So we've launched a campaign in several European countries where we work hand in hand with food manufacturers, large and small, to better explain these dates to consumers and to really make consumers trust their senses again when it comes to best before label products, and make people understand that it's perfectly safe to consume a best before product that has been stored properly past expiration date, even if it has been opened. So you will see manufacturers that make those changes on their products as part of this campaign, to better explain what a best before date really and actually means. And of course, this is an enormous step for businesses to take to change their labeling and to explain their product expiration dates on products in order to better inform consumers and increase their awareness with regards to the actual meaning of best before products.
Thank you. That's great. Both of you mentioned there working with supermarkets and big names, and the supermarkets often get a bad rap in the food debate generally. at all levels. But of course, they are commercial businesses and they are reaching millions of people. So do you, when you're brokering these things, are you purely dealing with them on a social context, or is it about how to make that this can make their businesses better?
I mean, I would say it's sorry. I would say it's both. We at Too Good To Go, we work with retailers in all of Europe, and you know, it's important to say that retailers, food waste happens along the entire food supply chain. It's definitely not only, and it's not even majority at retail level. Majority of food waste in Europe happens at household and consumer level. That being said, there are efforts to make across the entire food supply chain, and only through increased cooperation between the various actors in the supply chain can we bring down food waste levels. And yes, I'll expand a bit later on what we do more concretely with retailers. I'll let Aoife begin first.
Thanks. Yeah, I think just to build on a couple of your points, Christophe. So I can only speak to the UK in this context. 70% of post-farm gate waste occurs in the UK at the household level. However, I think retailers have an enormous responsibility to make sure that they don't oversell to consumers, buy one, get one offs, confusing date labels, selling carrots in a 2 kilo bag or a 1 kilo bag to a family of 2 or 3 are all practices that are quite embedded across many of the main retailers that may not result in food waste at the retail level, but they potentially result in waste at the home level afterwards. So I think when we engage with the retailers, as we often do, because that's where most people in the UK buy their food, we put it to them, and they generally accept wholeheartedly that they have a strong responsibility to make sure that people understand the food that they're buying, that they understand how to store it and make the most of it and make sure that it doesn't go to waste. So that's always at the core of any partnership that we'd strike with a retailer. We do appreciate that they're corporate entities and their main priority is to turn a profit. However, because they are that main provider, and this really came to light during COVID actually, that the British public are just incredibly reliant on supermarkets for their daily food. I think all retailers here really accept that responsibility that they have to make sure people understand the food they buy.
We'll come back to COVID later on, and certainly that transfer in some ways, possibly more local from the supermarkets and if that taking place. But I just wanted to build on, I mean, you mentioned it, Christophe, but there is a role and there are different drivers in how to tackle food waste in the policy terms, through business we just talked about, and through individuals and through consumers. And indeed we've got a comment particularly already about responsibility of the consumer in food waste. But in those 3 areas, could you just expand a little bit more on where you think the most effective change can come from people, from businesses, and from policy? Because it's got to be all 3, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be all 3, and by extension, it has to be the entire supply chain, as I said already. I think the responsibility is shared. You know, it's businesses and policymakers' responsibility to make clear that to lead by example, first of all, and to make clear that wasting food like we have been is no longer acceptable in today's society. It's a responsibility on the consumer side to take action and to change the mentality and the way they consume food, to not overbuy, to learn to cook again, learn to cook with scraps and waste, but learn to cook with everything that's in your fridge, and not reorder out of convenience. So the responsibility is shared, but I think it's very different when you look at the consumer from looking at businesses and policymakers. There is a lot to do at business and policymaker level, but it's more a leadership and an example role to take than the consumer level.
So when we talk about circular economy and new Green Deals and European Green Deal and all that, they're big conceptual ideas, but they don't mean an awful lot to a lot of people on the ground. And I suppose one of the things that you're trying to do is make that bridge so that people, how do you deal with it, the enormity of the issue as an individual on a day-to-day basis?
I think before I speak to how we support consumers to make better choices around food, I'd just like to add one piece to the previous discussion, which is that we actually are calling for mandatory reporting of wasting across the full supply chain of all major food businesses in the UK. And we're also calling for government support for regional food hubs in lower income areas where people can build up their food skills. So that's just something to flag, that we do believe that when companies report their waste right across the chain, waste tends to come better under control, and more surplus food tends to be donated. So that's got a sort of a net positive that we've seen with quite a number of retailers in particular who've started openly and publicly, transparently reporting their waste. So I think that's kind of a key policy piece that should be in the mix. On the consumer side, it's a really interesting and complex problem. The way that people buy food, the way they're taught in school, and the way we've come to sort of depend on very conveniently available food at quite a low cost in the UK has disempowered the public to a great extent around food skills. So over, say, 2 generations, there's been quite a large knowledge gap around how to preserve and make the most of your food has opened up. So I agree that there are a lot of very kind of high level discussions going on around waste, and that doesn't always translate into something tangible that people feel that they can do at home. So our approach at Hubbub tends to be to reach people with fun, accessible, incredibly simple and clear information that they can convert into action. And incentivizing new behavior is always a really, really key way to make change. So we never present the issue of food waste in a negative sense, that people are trashing the environment or not being responsible. We approach it as an opportunity to feel a bit healthier, to save a bit of cash at home, and to do your bit for the environment. And that tends to provoke a really positive response amongst people at the household level. So, for example, I mentioned that we've worked recently with Tesco, and we've worked with other retailers and local authorities. Over 5 weeks in August, we ran a series of challenges that households could take part in. So 1 week we challenged them to batch cook for the week, saying this is going to save you some money, this will save you time later in the week, and it'll be an enjoyable family or household activity. And then we incentivize people to share their photographs of what they'd achieved that week and offer each other peer-to-peer tips and support on a closed Facebook group. The week after, we set people a challenge of making a smoothie with all the fruit that was kind of gone soft in their fruit bowl or in their fridge. And again, with the same results, we offered spot prizes, etc. So for us, communicating those incredibly complex policy level initiatives, we essentially try to make it fun, and we try to make it something that will just feel like a positive, easy thing to do at home.
Encouraging people to be creative as well, use their creative skills.
100%. And I must say that in this project that I'm speaking to, and many previous projects along these lines that we've run, when you equip people with the really basic information about what's safe to do, for example, with their food, their creativity runs wild. I've been really overwhelmed at the brilliant ideas that people came back with, things that we'll be able to take forward into future campaigns.
I think that's the root point, isn't it? It's about when you empower people in processes, all processes, when they're active rather than passive in something, that's when you start to see the change. Christophe, did you want to clear?
Yeah, I mean, on the creativity point, I have to also add that in the UK we run an annual poetry competition in schools on food waste, which is massively successful and really gets the creative juices flowing. But for us, much more important is that we bring the food waste awareness issue to the school level. This is part of what we do as a movement against food waste to inspire younger generations and really work with the schools. We've also done the joint work with the FAO, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, on the development of materials for raising awareness on food waste in school curriculums, and really integrating that in different age groups as work in schools.
Because you've got an example of a poem there.
Sorry?
You haven't got one of the poems to hand.
They're all accessible for free on our website.
Oh, great. That's good. That's a great initiative. Let's talk a little bit more about, I think there's some great examples, and the app is another one, Christophe, that you mentioned at the start. And what do you think are some of the blockages? Because obviously we've not solved it by a long way yet. What are some of the main blockages still preventing us getting a reduction in food waste, and how can we apply some of the things you're talking about, education, technology, those sort of things, to the fight?
Yeah, I mean, again, each level of the supply chain presents different blockers. At consumption level, it's a mentality shift. More importantly, at business and at policy making level, it's about increased ambition. And at business level, we see some businesses, retailers, manufacturers voluntarily measure their food waste level and try to tackle it. Very good. Not enough. Why? Because not enough types of food are being measured. Not enough businesses are committing to voluntarily put those measures in place. So good first steps, but much more to do. The same thing at policymaker level. Throughout Europe, there are legislative regimes in place to prevent food waste across the country. Very good example in France, for example, where the Loi Garot in 2016 tried to tackle the food waste problematic by mandating donation agreements for supermarkets with charities. On the other hand, first of all, that example could be replicated in other countries, but it could also be let's say, extended to other areas. There are too many countries in Europe still where it is cheaper for businesses to throw food away than to donate it for human consumption, and that's just crazy when you think about it and you say it again. It's cheaper to destroy food than to give it away to organizations that will donate it for human consumption. So when you're talking about barriers, it's again, I feel that is my response since the beginning, but it's across the supply chain. It presents in different shapes and forms with consumers, businesses, and at policy level. I think we have an enormous window of opportunity at policy level when you look at what the EU is trying to do in the farm to fork strategy and the initiatives. The initiative that it plans to come forward with. I'm thinking about binding food waste reduction targets. I'm thinking about ways to make product expiration dates more clear and more understandable for consumers. On the other hand, there are a lot of missed opportunities as well. We have the Paris agreements at COP, through which all countries in the EU and beyond needed to present national climate action plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we see very little take-up of what can be done in the food systems incorporated in those national greenhouse gas reduction plans, even though food waste, as you said in the beginning, accounts for 8 to 10% of all GHG emissions globally. So I think we have both missed opportunities, but I think we have windows of opportunity as well, and I think we should focus on those.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think Christophe covered off a lot of the barriers that we'd identify, but I think we just need to have more conversations with retailers and policymakers about the standard of food we've come to expect, the aesthetic standard of food. we need to be much more open to buying food that looks wonky, quote unquote, which is essentially what that food normally looks like. So I think we've come to expect perfectly homogenous looking fruit and vegetables, which is very problematic and leads to a lot of waste at the pre-farm gate level. There's a lack of transparency right across the food chain, as we've spoken to already, and that's particularly profound at the pre-farm gate level. So the kind of production or growing level, it's difficult to really quantify how much food is wasted there, but it's certainly a lot. We need to hold the retailers to account for their buying practices from producers, so that the pressure isn't on those producers to waste gluts or to waste food that isn't perfectly pleasing on the eye. And there's an issue also, it's quite an interesting one, and this is where we get into the complexities of food waste, in encouraging retailers to donate more, as is the case in France, and as we do, which greatly benefits our community fridge network. There is an issue with overproduction of particular types of food and over donation of particular types of food, such as baked goods and short shelf life bread. So we need to be really conscious when we're encouraging more donation of surplus food from retailers and producers to charities that could redistribute it. We need to make sure that that's fresh, healthy food we're suggesting is redistributed, rather than trays upon trays of stale bread or bread that won't last a couple of days more. Because that we want, if we're donating surplus food, we want to make sure that that's food that's really going to benefit the people receiving it, rather than, you know, white bread or croissants.
It's interesting, you know, but I still can't help but feel in my mind, we've been at this for 30 or 40 years, and we still haven't managed to, you know, to solve some of those conundrums. So there must be some way that we need to make to break that blockage. And I'm thinking about more globally as well. Of course, you know, in the industrialized countries, the waste appears at a certain point in the chain, which is different in the developing world. But then we have, why do you think, what can we learn from, you know, Greece, China, countries like that can maintain a fairly low level of waste, whereas Australia, the USA and others are incredibly high? Is that, I mean, what can we use? Is it in our history? Is it in our tradition? Is it in new tech that you talked about, Christophe? Blockage go, because it's just endless to me. It seems my whole life we've been having this conversation about needlessly throwing food away.
Yeah, you're setting me up there for a good response, Don. But since you mentioned it, I'm I'm very happy to announce that 10 days ago we crossed over the Atlantic, and we started our activities in the US on the East Coast to start, in New York and Boston, and we will officially launch by the end of September. But that's to say that yes, even in the US, food waste, and especially at consumer level, is even larger than in Europe, which is hard to imagine. But you can argue on the reasons why. Is it evolution of consumption society? Is it the expectations that we have with regards to our food? I'm sure there's ingredients of all of that. What we're trying to do is provide a response and a solution for it to diminish those food waste levels at both industry and household level.
I don't have a huge amount to add to that. I mean, I could go deep into my sort of food anthropology interests here and speak to the psychology of plenty and how that's affected us as a society. We're programmed to be terrified of food shortages as human beings, and when it's very plentiful, we tend to probably buy more than we need, and as a result, waste. And the way food is produced in enormously complex chains, often spanning right across the world, and provided to us in an incredibly convenient way that diminishes any fears about shortages, all have a role to play. But I think, to my mind, certainly at the consumer level, upskilling and kind of bringing back skills that have been lost, skills and knowledge that have been lost over the last 2 generations are absolutely key. People don't want to throw food in the bin. They often throw food in the bin because they think it's not safe to eat anymore. And that's as a result of confusing date labels. It's a result of overcautious labeling at the retail level often. And it's simply as a result of that like distancing that has come about between our senses and the food that we've bought and we're about to eat. So at that household level, there just is that huge skills and knowledge gap to fill, which we're working hard to do. And I know Christophe and his work are very focused on too. And then at the policy level, there is that accountability piece, just working more and more towards making it unacceptable for food to be overproduced, rejected because it's not perfect, and wasted all along the supply chain.
I see that Christophe, you've actually answered in the chat box, and that's a thing that's come up, and about the shapes and sizes, and odd box is a very good example. There are lots and lots of initiatives, but we do, I mean, education and technology are things that you've both mentioned, and they have to be strong themes in that. Just to talk about this a little bit more, and again, you've both talked about campaigns and awareness, but how can we get more transparency into the food chain and all these things? If you were talking about, you know, things produced in other parts of the world, transglobal, all that sort of stuff. What are some things we could do to really start to give people the information to make those changes you're talking about?
I mean, I can kick off with maybe more the business level rather than consumers. First step to transparency on food waste and to reducing food waste is actually measuring it, right? Without measuring your food waste levels, you can set all the targets you want, but you don't know what you're acting against. So EU member states will have to measure and report food waste levels from next year onwards, and that's hopefully setting something in motion already. Based on the results of those measurements and reporting, the EU will assess whether binding food waste reduction targets will be necessary from 2020. So, you know, this is combining window of opportunity with what you're saying with regards to transparency on the need to actually measure what we're trying to reduce, right? This is also what we're trying to push at every level of government, whether it's local or whether it's in an individual institution. You know, if a school, if a hospital wants to reduce, if a canteen wants to reduce its food waste levels, we always advocate for measuring it first and having an accurate picture of what is going on in first instance.
It's more than just knowing that you waste it, knowing how the whole process is wasteful. Is that not part of the light bulb for the individual and for the organization?
Yeah, absolutely.
Aoife.
Yeah, I think I'd like to take a slightly different approach to this question, or a different response to this question. You spoke to the problem of people not really understanding how far their food has come from and what's occurred within that supply chain. Something that we've seen in the UK over previous months as a result of COVID is a bit more food citizenship or food agency, where people are paying more attention to where their food came from, and out of necessity or choice have been choosing more local food schemes. And I think that's one of the really key ways to reduce incredibly high levels of waste right across supply chains and food chains, is to shorten those supply chains in some case, or at least diversify them, so that people have an option to choose perhaps a food supplier that has been grown locally, where food has been grown locally, with fewer inputs across the board than you might have if you're purchasing, say, mangoes from Pakistan, buying a veg box containing greens, carrots and beets from Walthamstow, for example, is a really good solution if people are looking to just be that bit more engaged with their food and where it comes from. Knowing the story behind your food as well is always a very strong incentive to make sure that you use it all up, and receiving information with that food, as is often the case with veg boxes, whether they're tips on using it up or recipes, etc., is another great prompt for eating everything that you get into the home.
Just to move on to that, you mentioned COVID, and of course, dominating all our lives at the moment, and certainly maybe short term, maybe long term, changing the way that we're consuming and buying food. You know, there's a huge onus on the local at the moment. City centres across the world are not functioning at anything like capacity. People have made more online shopping, going back to local, all those sort of things. I wondered if you think that will it change things? Has it accelerated something that was a natural progression, or do you think it's just a moment and that we will revert? Or I'm sort of thinking I'm seeing a behavioural change accelerated. But from your perspective, where you live, what you're seeing, what do you think about it?
Should I go first?
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting question. Back in April, I commissioned national polling across the UK to try and understand how and whether people's attitudes, knowledge and practices around food had changed and what they needed to know to kind of get through that difficult period. So we found that about half of people said they were wasting less than ever before. And I think 65 or 67% of people said that they were valuing their food more than ever before. Huge numbers of people said they were getting children involved in cooking for the first time, that they'd started growing their own food already at that point, and that they were, I think generally just seeking ways to make what they bought go further. Obviously, all of this was as the result of a really significant crisis, but I think it did blow open a space that was very, very hard to access before around discussing value around food. It definitely highlighted to the British public how long and complex our supply chains are, and turned their attention, as I've mentioned already, to more local options for buying food. I think we've seen some research since in July and then again a couple of weeks ago that suggests that people are still more or less in that frame of mind where they want to waste less and they do value their food more. I think this kind of speaks to the psychology piece I mentioned a while ago. We're programmed to make sure that we don't run out of food as humans. And I think when people saw shortages, it gave them sort of a once in a generation opportunity to really think about their food. So at Hubbub, we've seen two things. One is that the demand for information about how to make your food go further has gone way up over the last 6 months, and that hasn't really diminished. People who kind of engage with our campaigns and people who we've engaged through new campaigns are incredibly keen to make the most of their food and want to continue doing so. And then the much more negative side of things is that obviously we've seen a huge increase in food insecurity and food poverty across the UK as a result of the economic kind of compression going with COVID. Our campaigns will be very, very focused over the next year on supporting people to make the most of the food that they have on as small a budget as possible. So there is an opportunity there to keep speaking to people about food waste and supporting them to make better choices with their food. As a result, I think, of the economic downturn that's coming.
Talk about that a little bit more in a minute, where we're going in the next few years. Christophe, what about from your perspective? How do you see these things?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with what Aoife says. We've seen a level of behavior change linked to the current COVID crisis. Something that we can only hope, the behavior change will last. One thing we've also noticed is an increased amount of food waste, especially in rural areas and cities during the crisis. So for us, one of the things we've decided is to focus a lot more on what can be done at city level, because in the end, that's where food waste is generated. That's where people live. That's where food stores are. So our focus moving forward will partly focus there. In the first part of the year, and actually in the middle of the first months of the COVID crisis, we've started an initiative in France where we asked city mayors whether they wanted to sign up to a 7-point charter with concrete commitments to reduce food waste in their city, in their municipality, in their commune. So this is cities large and small, and those were candidates for mayor because, as you know, earlier this year we had municipal elections in France. And in the end, following the first and second round of elections, we ended up with 41 elected mayors, including of the 10 largest cities of France, that are signatories of this food waste reduction charter in cities. So we now have mayors representing just under 7 million French citizens that have taken at least commitments to take tangible action on food waste reduction, which range from organizing an awareness event in their city on food waste, to allocating part of the city budget to food waste reduction programs, to awareness raising campaigns. Anyway, so on the website again, 7-point charter. It's a question of follow-up now, but that combined with the fact that we've seen an increased amount of food waste in cities leads us to push that angle even further moving forward.
I did notice that Mayor Hidalgo in Paris in her re-election campaign was very much stressing I think is it the 1 kilometer, that you should be able to source everything in your daily life within a small localized plan, which is quite an interesting policy plank for a mayor of a major European city. Berlin. So
yeah, she's one of the signatories.
Yes, I was going to say, is that related to this charter?
That exact point is not related to the charter, but she is one of the signatories of the charter. Yeah.
And that can have a huge impact when a city like that. Just give us 2 or 3 examples of what's in the charter.
So the ones I just mentioned, organizing a food waste reduction event in the city, which can be a festival or another type of awareness event. Festival these days is a bit tricky, but an awareness raising event. Allocating part of the budget, of the municipal budget, to food waste reduction initiatives, committing to having the municipal buildings such as schools, hospitals, etc., work with charities in the food waste area. Those are 3 that I can think of top of my head.
And one of our audience is asking, what's the title of it, Christophe?
I'll drop it in the in the comment section.
So I mean, you mentioned the global recession, which is definitely upon us, if not upon us, about to be upon us. And it's going to have a huge impact on Europe and our impact on our relationship with food and food waste and customers. And it'd be interesting to hear what you think might be some of the challenges and the opportunities in that. But the other thing that I can never get away from in all of this is when you look at the way that the global south and the developing world is being impacted by COVID and will be impacted by global recession so acutely. How do we do all this, what we're doing in Europe, within that global context as well? 2 different areas, but I'd be interested in any thoughts you have around these.
Yeah, there's obviously a couple of things to pick through there. Yeah. In terms of the challenges coming down the track, obviously the biggest potential challenge is that in a national recession in the UK, in a global recession, environmental issues could potentially fall off the agenda as we go to sort of the more kind of fundamentals of keeping the show on the road. So I think that's probably one of the big challenges that we see coming down the track. But when it comes to food waste, sustainable diets and public health linked to food, all of these different pieces are very closely linked. So as I mentioned, within our our network of community fridges, a lot of people have come to rely on those fridges for surplus food from retailers to kind of pad out their larder, and I'd imagine in quite a few cases actually just to kind of keep food coming into the household. It's quite a complex one for us because our ideal would be not to have the need for community fridges because they do absorb retail surplus, or if they did exist, that they'd be more for individuals to come and share food that they're not going to use, rather than us being kind of a site for retailers. The ideal is that retailers don't produce so much surplus that they can contribute to 100 community fridges and many other organisations around the UK. But the reality is, of course, that there will always be some mismatch between production and then purchasing in supermarkets, and there will always be some level of food waste. So I think that the community fridge network will continue to be a really valuable resource as we head into this recessionary time.
Where do you find the main contributors to the community fridges are from? Are they from the local communities?
Retailers are the main donators, yeah, and then lots of individuals would come along if they have a glut in their garden, for example, or if they buy too much before they go on holiday and need to drop off some food. But the main contributor to the food at the community fridge network is retailers and some food manufacturers and producers too. One thing that we really want to do with the community fridge network, which is all across the UK, is to build out as many of those fridges into community food hubs where people can come and take cooking classes, get nutritional information. If somebody's a local food producer, they can do value-adding activities and maybe market or sell their food there. That local growers could potentially sell their food there too at a sort of a competitive market price. So we really want to take shorter supply chains out of the niche space and bring them into very accessible local food hubs, and also have them as spaces where people can pick up some surplus food.
So there's an opportunity. We don't want them, these fridges, but there's an opportunity.
I mean, we want them, of course, but we don't want them. We want them to be more. We want them to fulfil even greater potential than they have at the moment. And obviously, we don't want a situation where the model is simply retailers donating surplus and people needing that surplus because they can't afford to put food on the table. So it's an incredibly complex problem to unpack, but they serve an incredible service in their communities. They're real hubs for people to get together and socialise. Lots of them run as community cafes. Isolated people can come along and have a cup of tea and a sandwich from surplus. So it's all wonderful. But in an ideal world, in terms of food waste, there wouldn't be so much surplus.
In fact, just before I hand over to you, Christophe, this is probably a good time to say, indeed, do look up the websites of Hubbub, and if you're in the UK, get involved. But as part of the festival and the themes, and in particular with this debate, OPP are asking festival goers to give something back and make a donation towards Brussels Brabant Food Bank. And you can make a donation in the special dedicated booth area. They're looking to raise €3,000, and OPP is pledged to make up the difference should there be a shortfall. So if you have the chance during the day to contribute to that, I think that would be really pertinent and really helpful. Christophe.
Thanks, Don. Yes, I mean, it's I don't have a lot of to add to what Aoife said. We're conscious of the fact that our technological solution to food waste predominantly helps to cater the environmental and the economical consequences of food waste. and much less the social ones. So we're doing a lot of work to increase our presence in that area. First of all, we have agreements with food banks in every country where we operate. We have a donation model through our application, where people that use the app and rescue food through the app can also donate to local food banks on the Too Good To Go app. That's one. Secondly, we've started a cooperation, a partnership in France. Just recently with Andes. Andes is a network of social grocery stores, which now function for us as a third-party pickup point for surplus food from industrial production sites. So imagine a large food manufacturer like Danone or Nestle or Unilever has surplus food in stocks, often linked to specific campaigns, linked to the type of the year that they cannot sell to retail afterwards. We now channel those to that network of social grocery stores, whereby a large part goes to the social grocery store and a smaller part goes for sale on the Too Good To Go application for pickup at the social grocery store. So there are small steps, but we're hoping that they help, and as we increase our efforts to the social side effects of food waste.
I think small steps is a good thing. It's like Joseph Beuys, the misappropriate quote, takes 1,000 brushstrokes to make a painting, and a lot of the stuff you're talking about is that incremental thing. I'll just say to anyone who's listening, if they do, we're in the last 10 minutes, if they had any other points or questions, do just put them in the chat box. As we draw towards the end, I think, Aoife, you mentioned it, and maybe I'll come back to you with a bit more, Christophe. Just tell me where you hope the focus of your work will be for your organizations, for Too Good To Go and Hubbub over the next couple of years. Where's your ambition? Where do you really want to take things? You've alluded to it, but tell me a bit more.
My first ambition really is to connect more with just the general public around food waste. I think it's still a subject that remains a little bit shrouded in mystery for a lot of people. Most people in the UK think that they don't waste food, which is a really interesting insight in itself. The normal pattern is for people to waste little food, but often, and obviously that all adds up, because the individual, they're not accountable for the food that they waste and never will be. So it's very, very difficult for the sort of household level to see the impact that the food that they waste has. And my ambition would be to work really hard to sort of fill that knowledge gap and also help people become more empowered as food citizens, understand where their food's from and have more skills to make the most of it and have healthier lives with less money wasted as a result. So there's a huge possibility there. And also for us to just engage more at the policy level on boosting that transparency I spoke to earlier, and continuing to work with local authorities, retailers, etc., just to make sure that we reach their audiences with as much information as possible around reducing waste and living a more sustainable life.
Policy and practice. Christophe.
I think for us, in terms of ambition, it's first of all to be part of the solution on the food waste problematic more broadly. So we're very ingrained in Europe at the moment. We can develop further, but we really want to drive our efforts globally in the years to come and have an impact that way. Secondly, and probably more importantly, is the necessary increased awareness on the problem that food waste presents. It's a slower process, but we're working on it nonetheless. I'm taking then this opportunity to highlight that on the 29th of September, So in a couple of weeks, the UNFAO organizes the first edition of the International Day of Awareness on food loss and food waste. This is a newfound initiative by the FAO, so we hope that it will gain in importance and visibility year by year to really highlight the problem that food waste brings. So two things, growing as a solution to be one of the organization that helps tackling the problem. And secondly, finding an increased awareness with policymakers, with households, with businesses on the global food waste problematic.
Well, that sounds a promising initiative, and I hope we can see that grow. There's a question there on the chat box, Christophe, maybe for you. What about key metrics we use to measure food waste? And we've talked a bit about those at the start and some of the big figures, but maybe I just slightly rephrase it. How important do you think metrics and getting better at metrics and data is going to be in this next stage?
Yes, it's of primordial importance, and also the fact of having a common methodology and sets of data to measure food waste levels. The European Commission defined such a common methodology for European countries, but of course that doesn't necessarily is not necessarily convenient for every actor in the food supply chain. What has helped in the last few years, where the Refresh and the Fusions project, co-financed by the European institutions, that have done a lot of work on compiling the data on food waste levels and really getting that sort of overcoming that measurement and lack of data hurdle. But in short, I will say it's essential to address the problem.
So we spent nearly an hour discussing a lot of complex issues, and of course what the organisers want us to do to finish is in one word or in one sentence, summarise a big idea or something fundamental you think can make a huge difference in this area that we've been talking about. So who's going to have a go at one big thing, one big idea, one thing close to your heart that can really make change around the area of food waste?
I think for me, and I'm starting to feel like I'm on repeat here, I should have held back to the end. But I think one of the many things that we can do towards tackling food waste is closing the knowledge gap that exists at the consumer level.
I'll do businesses and policymakers then, but for me it's higher ambition and really taking responsibility for the issue of food waste. Great.
So that sort of brings us to the end of the formal thing. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think the panel's been absolutely fantastic. Aoife and Christophe, I want to thank you so much for giving us such a good insight into what you do in your organizations, but also the wider context and the narrative. And I really would encourage people to look further at Hubbub UK and Too Good To Go and their website, data and information on there, and take some of the ideas and reappropriate them. I always think that's a good thing into your context. But unless you've got anything further to add, I would just, on behalf of OPP, thank you. Thank you very much for your contribution. And I hope those of you listening have enjoyed it and you enjoy the rest of the festival. But if there's nothing else, I think it's over and out from us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Donald. Thanks, Aoife.
Thanks, Christophe. Thanks, Donald.